As we'll see, that there are metacognitive strategies and cognitive strategies, and we've got to make sense of these different terms. So let's start with cognitive strategies. Now, that can be a little bit confusing because cognitive strategies sometimes referred to as thinking categories, and that's because thinking in the psychological literature is called cognition. So pretty much the same thing. And is that different from a learning strategy? Well, not really, because when we learn something, we typically have to do some thinking. So it's all bound up together. So take those terms pretty much as generic. Example would be mind mapping. It's a strategy that gets us thinking, organizing information to help us learn better. There's many types of thinking strategies, as we know. There's strategies for reading better, quicker. There's memory strategies. There's strategies for practice. And whilst these may exist as physical tools like mind mapping and the thinking apps and plus minus interesting concept maps, things like that, it's all to do with what we actually do inside our heads. So we can be using these tools but not necessarily using them well, and I've seen people do mind mapping and very often it's just a mess of connected things but not within the hierarchical structuring of the subject domain. So it's about doing good thinking, using these tools to enhance our learning. There's the mind mapping example. You can digest that. It's essentially what I've just said. And again, it's not just about using strategies here and there, but using the strategies for the particular type of learning in the context. So as teachers, we must be pretty clear in our own minds what we're talking about here, and to be able to infuse those into our curriculum so that students learn them at useful times within the context of their subject domain learning. These two slides now seem to have a lot of information on, and I don't want to create cognitive overload, but essentially it identifies some of the different strategies, some of the main strategies that we may use, how to use them, when to use them, and their purpose. So again, it's about getting students over time, not all in one go, familiar with strategies over a period of learning, and this could be even a year. But it will typically probably occur over one term when students have to do these different types of learning. There's some more here, exactly the same principle. Now, let's take the meaty bit. There's a little advanced organizer down at the bottom that when we do things, we do them in the real world and we engage with them through our mind. And there's the old meta bit of metacognition, in a sense, monitoring that. So let's build it up. Even in the field itself, there is no very absolute clear distinction between what's a cognitive strategy and a metacognitive strategy, because the mind is a dynamic entity and these things can be going on together. We can be using cognitive strategies, being metacognitive, generating other strategies and using those strategies. However, there's an important clear difference that we can get students to be aware of, and that is that when we're using a cognitive strategy, it's about acquiring, retaining, transferring knowledge for some purpose. So as you can see, things like memory, tools, thinking tools, organizational tools. Whereas with the metacognitive strategies, again, it's more managing the overall process, monitoring the tools that we're using, evaluating whether they're working or not. Is it helping us to meet our goals? And do we need to choose different ones? There's a nice bit here from Flavel, and we typically become metacognitive when cognition becomes problematic. So if we're learning something and everything's going nicely and we know what tools to use and the learning's moving along and we're moving towards our goals, we're building understanding and competence, then it's very much at a cognitive level. But once it gets challenging, that's when we're more likely to be metacognitive. So as Flavel there suggests, cognitive strategies facilitate learning and task completion, whereas metacognitive strategies manage this process. So quite a complex slide, a lot of stuff there, but what I'm trying to do is to keep things summarized, keep it simple but not simplistic, because at the end of the day we've got to be very clear about how we communicate this, how we build it into our curriculum and facilitate it. There we go.